Montana prairie sprawled like a sea of secrets, its winds carving lonesome ballads through the tall grass. In the summer of 1885, Sage Hollow was a forgotten speck on the map, its sun-scorched shacks leaning against the weight of a land that broke hearts as easily as it birthed them. Beyond the town's rutted streets, where dust swirled like ghosts, lay a ranch so still it seemed the earth had stopped breathing. The silence wasn't kind, it was a suffocating shroud, woven from grief that clung to every splintered board and rusted nail. This was Elliot Wade's world, a place where time had faltered, and the echoes of loss lingered like a winter that never thawed. Elliot was 36, but sorrow had etched years into his bones. His brown eyes, deep as a frozen river, held a quiet ache shadowed by the memory of his wife, Clara, and their unborn child taken by fever 3 summers past. His face, weathered by sun and solitude, bore a faint scar above his left cheekbone, a jagged reminder of a bar fight he'd stumbled through in a haze of whiskey. His dark hair, cropped close with streaks of early gray, was often tucked beneath a worn felt hat, its brim curled like a clenched fist. He wore a faded flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms knotted from years of hauling hay and mending fences, paired with canvas pants that sagged at the knees, tucked into boots scuffed raw by the prairie's bite. A silver locket, etched with Clara's initials, hung beneath his collar, its weight a constant tether to a life he couldn't reclaim. The ranch was crumbling, shutters rattling like bones, hearth cold as stone, and Elliot had stopped fighting it. When the house began to choke him, he sent word to Sage Hollow for a hired hand, expecting little more than someone to sweep away the decay and keep the silence from crushing him. She arrived on a blistering Thursday, stepping off a stagecoach that groaned under its own exhaustion. Lena was younger than he'd pictured, 24 at most, her frame whittled thin by hunger and hardship, though her gray-blue eyes burned with a wary fire, like a spark caught in a storm. Her pale auburn hair was pinned in a loose bun, stray strands clinging to a face dusted with faint freckles, each one a silent marker of trials she didn't share. Her dress, a patched gray cotton, hung loose, its frayed hem brushing boots so worn they seemed to sigh with every step. A simple brass bracelet circled her wrist, glinting faintly in the sun, a solitary relic of a past she kept buried. She clutched a small canvas bag, her knuckles pale, and when Elliot offered a gruff, "You the one for the job?" her voice was a whisper, "I'm Lena." Her gaze flicked to his, then dropped as if holding eye contact might unravel something she wasn't ready to face. The ranch loomed as they approached, its weathered boards sagging under the prairie's relentless wind. Elliot pushed open the door, hinges screaming like a wounded animal. Inside, the air was thick with neglect, a stale blend of dust, old cedar, and something heavier. Grief, perhaps, baked into the walls. Lena's boots echoed on the scarred floorboards, each step measured as if she feared stirring something dormant. The kitchen was a relic of better days, a sagging table marred by knife scars, a hearth choked with ash, a single chair by a window fogged with grime. A faded curtain, once Clara's handiwork, hung limp, its stitches unraveling like forgotten promises. A chipped teacup sat forgotten on a shelf, its delicate handle cracked but unbroken, catching a stray beam of light. "Clean what you can," Elliot said, his voice rough but not unkind. "Rooms down the hall, left side. Pantry's stocked. Holler if you need me." Lena nodded, her eyes tracing the room, lingering on the teacup, then the curtain, as if reading a story written in the dust. As the sun sank, painting the prairie in hues of gold and crimson, Lena set to work. She swept the kitchen with a broom that shed bristles like tears, her movements precise, almost reverent, as if coaxing life back into the house's weary bones. She pried open a window, its frame groaning in protest, and let the prairie wind sweep through, carrying out the staleness and stirring the curtain's frayed edges. She found a tattered shawl draped over the chair, its weave soft but worn, and folded it with care, her fingers lingering as if it held a memory not her own. She scrubbed the table, her hand steady despite the tremble in her shoulders. And when she dusted the shelf, she paused at the teacup, brushing it gently, as if afraid it might shatter under her touch. Elliot stood on the porch, his locket heavy, against his chest, watching her silhouette through the glass. The prairie stretched endless before him, its grasses swaying like a sea under the deepening twilight. Lena's quiet wasn't empty. It was alive, full of unspoken stories like the hush before a storm breaks. He'd expected a stranger, someone to pass through his days unnoticed, but her careful hands and guarded eyes stirred something he thought long dead, a flicker of warmth in a heart he'd buried with Clara. The stars began to pierce the sky, their light cold against the vast darkness, and Elliot lingered, his breath clouding in the cooling air. Who was this girl, breathing life into a house that had forgotten how to hope? And what shadows did she carry, heavy enough to silence her voice but not her spirit? The Montana prairie stirred under a dawn sky so vast it seemed to cradle every untold story in its endless blue. Sage Hollow's church bell rang faintly, its lonesome toll swallowed by the whisper of sagebrush and the restless hum of the wind. At Elliot's ranch, the silence had lost its sharp edge, though it still draped the house like a heavy quilt, stitched with memories of loss. Lena's quiet work had begun to breathe life into the weathered boards, her careful hands stirring the air where dust once ruled. But the shadows of Elliot's grief, and the ghosts Lena carried, lingered in the corners, waiting for a moment to speak their truths. Elliot rose before the sun, his boots scuffing the porch as he cradled a chipped enamel mug, the coffee's steam curling like a prayer. His brown eyes, deep as a frozen river, traced the horizon where the first light kissed the grasslands, turning them gold. The scar above his cheekbone itched in the cool air, a faint echo of a bar fight he'd stumbled through in a haze of whiskey and despair. His dark hair, cropped short with flecks of gray, peeked from beneath a worn felt hat, its brim curled tight. His flannel shirt hung loose, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms knotted from years of labor, and the silver locket beneath his collar, etched with Clara's initials, gleamed faintly, a weight he carried like a vow. 3 years of solitude had built a wall around his heart, but Lena's presence, quiet as a shadow, had found a crack. He didn't trust the feeling, didn't know what to make of it, but it was there, a thaw in a heart he'd thought iced over. Lena woke in her small room, the iron bed creaking under her slight frame, her gray-blue eyes opened to a sliver of dawn through the window, the prairie's golden sweep stretching beyond like a promise she couldn't yet believe. She smoothed her pale auburn hair into a loose bun, strands escaping to frame her freckled face, each freckle a silent marker of hardships she kept buried. Her patched gray cotton dress whispered against her worn boots, its frayed hem brushing the floorboards. The brass bracelet on her wrist caught the light as she moved, a solitary relic of a past she guarded fiercely. She stepped into the kitchen, her breath hitching at the sight of the chipped teacup on its shelf, its delicate handle gleaming like a fragile hope. The house felt less like a grave today, its silence softer, as if it were leaning in to hear her. She set to work with a quiet determination, scrubbing the hearth until her knuckles reddened, the ash giving way to stone that hadn't seen light in years. She hauled water from the well, her arms trembling under the bucket's weight, and washed the windows, their panes clearing to reveal the prairie's vastness and the distant silhouette of Sage Hollow's church steeple. When she found a rusted tin box tucked beneath a loose floorboard, she paused, her fingers tracing its edges. Inside was a faded blue ribbon, soft but frayed, and a pressed wildflower, its petals brittle but unbroken. She held them gently, her gray-blue eyes distant, as if glimpsing someone else's story. She tucked the box back, her hands steady but her heart unsteady, as if guarding a secret that wasn't hers to tell. Elliot watched from the corral, mending a fence with calloused hands, his hat tilted against the rising sun. Lena's quiet wasn't loud, but it filled the ranch like a melody he hadn't known he missed. She didn't ask about the locket or the locked door upstairs, where Clara's dresses hung like ghosts. She just worked, her presence a steady rhythm, against the house's stillness. He noticed the way she moved, cautious like she expected the ground to give way. When she hung laundry on the line, pinning sheets to catch the prairie wind, Her hands trembled slightly, as if the act was a defiance she wasn't sure she deserved. A gust slammed the screen door and she flinched, her shoulders tensing, but she didn't stop. Elliot's chest tightened. He knew that kind of flinch, the kind that came from wounds deeper than skin. That afternoon, as storm clouds gathered over Sage Hollow, Elliot hauled a sack of grain into the kitchen. Lena was kneading dough, her sleeves dusted with flour, the scent of rising bread weaving through the air like a faint promise. Her auburn bun had loosened, strands clinging to her neck, and her freckles stood out against her flushed cheeks. "You don't talk much," Elliot said, setting the sack down, his voice rough but laced with curiosity. Her hands stilled, her gray-blue eyes flicking to his, then to the dough. "Ain't much to say," she murmured, her voice a whisper that carried the weight of years. "Words don't undo what's been done." He leaned against the table, his scarred cheek catching the light through the window. "Reckon that's true," he said, his thumb brushing the locket beneath his shirt. "But you got a place here, Lena. Ain't just a job." He paused, searching her face. "Name's Elliot, case you missed it." A faint curve touched her lips, not a smile, but close enough to stir something in him. "Didn't miss it," she said softly, resuming her kneading with steady hands. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was shared, a fragile bridge between two souls who'd forgotten how to cross. As dusk draped the prairie in purples and oranges, Lena sat on the porch steps, her hands folded in her lap, the brass bracelet glinting faintly. Elliot joined her, his coffee mug steaming, the prairie stretching endless before them. He didn't speak, didn't need to. Her quiet was a language he was learning, word by word. The stars emerged sharp against the velvet sky, and a coyote's cry pierced the night, lonely but alive. What scars did Lena carry, hidden beneath her steady hands? And why did her silence feel like the first note of a song he wasn't sure he could sing? The Montana prairie shimmered under a late summer sun, its golden grasses swaying like a hymn to forgotten dreams. Sage Hollow's distant saloon spilled faint laughter into the wind, a jarring note against the ranch's quiet pulse. Lena's hands had begun to weave life into Elliot's home, her steady work softening the edges of a silence that once choked the air, but beneath the surface shadows stirred. Elliot's grief for Clara, Lena's unspoken wounds, each a weight they carried alone, yet somehow together, in the fragile space they'd carved. Elliot stood by the barn, his brown eyes scanning the horizon where clouds gathered, heavy with the promise of rain. The scar above his cheekbone gleamed faintly in the light, a mark of battles fought in darker days. His dark hair, streaked with gray, was tucked under his felt hat, its brim curled tight against the wind. His flannel shirt clung to his broad frame, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and the silver locket beneath his collar, Clara's initials etched deep, rested heavy against his chest. He'd spent years dodging memories, but Lena's presence, quiet as a whisper, stirred them awake. Her careful movements, her guarded gaze, reminded him of Clara, not in look, but in spirit, the way she held herself against a world that hadn't been kind. He didn't know what to do with that, didn't know if he could bear it. Lena woke to the soft patter of rain against her window, the prairie beyond her room a blur of gold and gray. Her gray-blue eyes, sharp with a wary fire, traced the droplets as they raced down the glass. She smoothed her auburn hair into a loose bun, strands framing her freckled face, and slipped into her patched gray dress, its frayed hem brushing her worn boots. The brass bracelet on her wrist glinted as she moved, a silent tether to a past she kept locked away. In the kitchen, the teacup on its shelf caught her eye, its cracked handle a quiet promise she couldn't name. The house felt alive today, its silence not a weight but a companion, as if it were learning to breathe with her. She set to work polishing the sagging table until its scars gleamed like stories. She mended a curtain, her needle flashing in the dim light, stitching together threads that had unraveled long ago. When she found a small wooden box behind the pantry shelf, she hesitated, her fingers trembling. Inside was a child's drawing, crudely, sketched wildflowers signed Clara in a shaky hand. Lena's breath caught, her gray-blue eyes clouding with something she couldn't place. She closed the box gently, tucking it back, as if guarding a piece of Elliot's heart he wasn't ready to reclaim. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming on the barn roof where Elliot repaired a loose beam. He watched Lena through the kitchen window, her silhouette a soft glow against the storm's gray. Her quiet wasn't just silence, it was survival, a strength he recognized but couldn't name. He noticed the way she flinched when the wind slammed the screen door, her shoulders tensing like a startled doe. When she carried firewood to the porch, her steps faltered at the crack of thunder, but she didn't drop the load. Her hands trembled, yet she stacked the wood with care, as if proving something to the storm itself. That evening, as the rain eased to a drizzle, Elliot stepped into the kitchen, his boots leaving muddy prints on the floor Lena had scrubbed clean. She was stirring a pot of stew, the scent of sage and beef filling the air, her auburn bun loosened from the day's work. "Storm's passin'," he said, hanging his hat on a peg, his voice rough but warm. Lena nodded, her gray-blue eyes flicking to his, then to the stew. "Good," she murmured, her voice soft but steady. She ladled a bowl and set it before him, her hands careful, as if the act was more than a chore. He sat, his scarred cheek catching the lamplight. "You don't flinch as much as you did," he said, his tone gentle, probing. "But you still do." Her hands froze, the spoon hovering over the pot. She set it down, her bracelet glinting as she folded her arms. "Some things don't leave you," she said, her voice low like a secret she hadn't meant to share. "They just wait." Elliot's thumb brushed the locket beneath his shirt, his brown eyes searching her face. "Know a thing or two about that," he said. "Clara, she's gone, but she ain't. Not really." He paused, the words heavy. "You got something waiting too, don't you?" Lena's gaze dropped, her freckles stark against her pale cheeks. She didn't answer, but her silence spoke louder than words. She turned back to the stove, her movement stiff as if guarding a wound that hadn't healed. As night fell, the prairie glowed under a moon that broke through the clouds, its light silvering the grasslands. Lena sat on the porch, her hands clasped tight, the bracelet a faint shimmer in the dark. Elliot joined her, his coffee mug steaming, the silence between them not empty, but full, like a song waiting for its first note. He didn't push, didn't ask for her secrets, but his presence was steady, a shield against the shadows she carried. What had broken Lena, leaving her to flinch at the world's sharp edges? And could Elliot's quiet kindness reach a heart that had learned to hide its pain? The Montana prairie glowed under an autumn sun, its golden grasses fading to amber as the season turned. Sage Hollow's saloon sent faint piano notes drifting on the breeze, a fleeting reminder of a world beyond the ranch's quiet embrace. Lena's hands had woven threads of life into Elliot's home, her steady work softening the silence that once gripped the house like a fist. Yet the shadows of their pasts, Elliot's grief for Clara, Lena's hidden scars, lingered like dust, in the corners stirring with every glance, every unspoken word. In the fragile space they shared, something new was taking root, delicate but undeniable. Elliot stood by the corral, his brown eyes tracing the prairie where the horizon blurred into a haze of gold and blue. The scar above his cheekbone caught, the light, a faint mark of battles fought in days when grief was his only companion. His dark hair, streaked with gray, was tucked under his felt hat, its brim curled tight against the wind. His flannel shirt clung to his broad frame, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms knotted from labor, and the silver locket beneath his collar, Clara's initials etched deep, rested heavy, a tether to a love he couldn't release. Lena's quiet presence had begun to shift his world, her guarded gaze and careful hands stirring memories he'd buried. He didn't know what to call it, this warmth, this ache, but it was alive and it scared him as much as it drew him closer. Lena woke to the soft creak of the ranch house settling, her gray-blue eyes opening to a dawn that painted her room in hues of rose and gold. She smoothed her auburn hair into a loose bun, strands framing her freckled face, each freckle a silent map of trials she kept locked away. Her patched gray dress whispered against her worn boots, its frayed hem catching the floorboards. The brass bracelet on her wrist glinted as she moved, a relic of a past she guarded fiercely. In the kitchen, the chipped teacup on its shelf gleamed, a quiet symbol of the house's slow awakening. The silence wasn't a weight anymore, it was a partner, dancing with her as she moved through the day. She set to work with a quiet resolve, baking bread that filled the air with warmth, its golden crust a small defiance against the ranch's cold past. She mended a torn quilt found in a trunk, her needle weaving through faded patches of stars and wildflowers, as if stitching together fragments of hope. When she found a small leather pouch behind a loose hearthstone, she paused, her fingers trembling. Inside was a lock of dark hair tied with a ribbon and a faded photograph of a young woman, Clara, her smile soft but fierce. Lena's breath hitched, her gray-blue eyes clouding with empathy. She tucked the pouch back, her hand steady but her heart racing, as if she'd glimpsed a piece of Elliot's soul he wasn't ready to share. Outside, the wind carried the scent of sage and earth as Elliot hauled firewood to the porch. He watched Lena through the kitchen window, her silhouette a soft glow against the morning light. Her quiet wasn't just survival, it was strength, a fire that burned beneath her guarded gaze. He noticed the way she flinched at sudden sounds, the creak of a door, the clatter of a fallen spoon. But she didn't falter. When she hung laundry on the line, her hands moved with purpose, pinning sheets to catch the breeze. Though her shoulders tensed as if expecting a blow, Elliot's chest tightened. He knew that flinch, the mark of a wound that hadn't healed. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Elliot stepped into the kitchen, his boots tracking dirt across the floor Lena had swept clean. She was chopping carrots for a stew, the knife flashing in her steady hands, the scent of sage and beef weaving through the air. Her auburn bun had loosened, strands clinging to her neck, and her freckles stood out against her flushed cheeks. "Smells like a home in here," he said, hanging his hat on a peg, his voice rough but warm. Lena's knife paused, her gray-blue eyes flicking to his, then to the cutting board. "Just doing my part," she murmured, her voice soft but carrying, a weight he felt in his bones. He leaned against the table, his scarred cheek catching the lamplight. "You're doing more than that," he said, his tone gentle, probing. "This place, it's breathing again, ain't done that in years." Her hands stilled, the knife resting on the board. She folded her arms, her bracelet glinting as she met his gaze for a heartbeat. "Don't know about that," she said, her voice low, like a secret she wasn't sure she could share. "Just keeping busy." Elliot's thumb brushed the locket beneath his shirt, his brown eyes searching her face. "Busy's one thing," he said. "But you're careful, Lena, like you're walking on glass." "Who broke it?" Her freckles paled, her gaze dropping to the floor. She didn't answer, but her silence was a story, raw and unspoken. She turned back to the stew, her movements stiff, as if guarding a wound that bled beneath her skin. Elliot didn't push, but he lingered, his presence steady, a quiet promise she didn't yet know how to trust. As dusk draped the prairie in purples and golds, Lena sat on the porch steps, her hands clasped tight, the bracelet a faint shimmer in the fading light. Elliot joined her, his coffee mug steaming, the prairie stretching endless before them. The stars began to pierce the sky, their light cold against the velvet dark. He didn't speak, but his silence was warm, a language they were both learning. A coyote's cry echoed in the distance, lonely but alive, and Lena's shoulders eased, just a fraction. What had carved the fear into her flinches, and could Elliot's quiet strength mend a heart that had learned to hide? Or would their shadows, too heavy to carry alone, draw them closer still? The Montana prairie lay hushed under a twilight sky, its amber grasses fading into shadows as autumn's chill crept in. Sage Hollow's distant lanterns flickered like stars fallen to earth, their glow too faint to reach the ranch where silence had become a shared language. Lena's quiet work had woven warmth into Elliot's home, her steady hands turning a house of grief into a place that dared to hope. But their pasts, Elliot's loss of Clara, Lena's buried wounds, cast long shadows threatening the fragile trust growing between them. In the stillness, something new stirred, a spark too delicate to name but too strong to ignore. Elliot stood by the barn, his brown eyes catching the last rays of a sun that bled crimson across the horizon. The scar above his cheekbone gleamed, faintly, a mark of battles fought in days when sorrow was his only friend. His dark hair, streaked with gray, was tucked under his felt hat, its brim curled tight against the evening breeze. His flannel shirt clung to his broad frame, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms knotted from labor, and the silver locket beneath his collar, Clara's initials etched deep, rested heavy, a tether to a love he couldn't let go. Lena's presence had cracked open his heart, her guarded gaze and careful hands stirring feelings he'd thought buried. He was afraid to name it, afraid to lose it, but it was there. A warmth that burned brighter with every shared silence. Lena woke to the soft creak of the house settling, her gray-blue eyes opening to a dawn that painted her room in hues of silver and rose. She smoothed her auburn hair into a loose bun, strands framing her freckled face, each freckle a quiet map of trials she kept hidden. Her patched gray dress whispered against her worn boots, its frayed hem catching the floorboards. The brass bracelet on her wrist glinted as she moved, a relic of a past she guarded like a secret flame. In the kitchen, the chipped teacup on its shelf glowed under the morning light, a symbol of the ranch's slow awakening. The silence wasn't a burden now. It was a partner, weaving through her days like a melody she was learning to hum. She set to work with a quiet resolve, baking, cornbread that filled the air with golden warmth. It sent a small rebellion against the house's cold past. She scrubbed the porch rail, her hand steady despite the tremble in her shoulders, and when she found a small wooden carving, a horse roughly whittled, tucked behind a shelf, she paused. Her gray-blue eyes softened, tracing its crude lines, and she set it beside the teacup, as if claiming a piece of the ranch's story for herself. Her movements were deliberate, almost reverent, as if she believed her care could mend more than just the house. Outside, the wind carried the scent of sage and frost as Elliot repaired a fence, his calloused hands driving posts into the earth. He watched Lena through the kitchen window, her silhouette a soft glow against the morning's gray. Her quiet wasn't just strength, it was survival, a fire that burned beneath her flinches. He noticed the way she tensed at sudden sounds, a crow's caw, the clatter of a bucket, but she didn't falter. When she hauled water from the well, her arms shook under the weight, but she didn't spill a drop. Her jaw set like she was proving something to the world. That evening, as the sky burned purple and gold, a loud crack split the air, a branch snapping under the wind's weight. Lena froze on the porch, her bucket clattering to the ground, her gray-blue eyes wide with a fear that cut Elliot's breath short. She backed against the wall, her hands trembling, her bracelet glinting in the dusk. Elliot dropped his axe and crossed the yard, his boots soft on the earth, his brown eyes steady. "Lena," he said, his voice low, like a hand reaching out. "It's just the wind." Her breath hitched, her freckles stark against her pale cheeks. She didn't speak, but her eyes locked on his, raw and unguarded for the first time. He stepped closer, slow, and draped his coat over her shoulders, its warmth heavy against her frame. "Whatever it was," he murmured, "it ain't here. You're safe." Lena's hands clutched the coat, her gaze dropping to the ground. "Don't know if I believe that," she whispered, her voice a thread frayed but honest. "But I want to." Elliot's thumb brushed the locket beneath his shirt, his heart pounding. "Clara used to say trust takes time," he said, his voice rough but warm. "Reckon she was right. You take all the time you need." She nodded, a faint curve touching her lips. Not a smile, but close enough to stir something in him. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was shared, a bridge between two souls learning to stand together. As night fell, the prairie glowed, under a crescent moon, its light silvering the grasslands. Lena sat on the porch steps, the coat still around her shoulders, her bracelet a faint shimmer in the dark. Elliot joined her, his coffee mug steaming, the stars sharp above them. He didn't push, didn't ask for her secrets. but his presence was a shield, steady and warm. What had broken Lena's trust, leaving her to flinch at the world's sharp edges, and could their shared silence spark a love strong enough to heal them both? The Montana prairie lay cloaked in autumn's chill, its amber grasses whispering secrets to a sky studded with stars. Sage Hollow's distant saloon had gone quiet, its lanterns dim against the vastness of the night. Lena's quiet work had transformed Elliot's ranch, her steady hands weaving warmth into a house once choked by grief. The shadows of their pasts, Elliot's loss of Clara, Lena's buried wounds, still lingered. But in the silence they shared, a fragile trust had taken root, blooming into something neither dared name. As the prairie held its breath, their hearts began to speak soft but sure. Elliot stood by the corral, his brown eyes reflecting the starlight that silvered the grasslands. The scar above his cheekbone gleamed faintly, a mark of battles fought, when sorrow was his only guide. His dark hair, streaked with gray, was bare, his felt hat resting on a post, its brim curled tight. His flannel shirt clung to his broad frame, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms knotted from labor, and the silver locket beneath his collar, Clara's initials etched deep, felt lighter tonight, as if his heart were loosening its grip on the past. Lena's presence had cracked open his world, her guarded gaze and careful hands kindling a warmth he hadn't known he could feel again. It wasn't just trust. It was something deeper, a spark that both terrified and tethered him. Lena woke to the soft rustle of wind through her window, her gray-blue eyes opening to a dawn that painted her room in hues of silver and amber. She smoothed her auburn hair into a loose bun, strands framing her freckled face, each freckle a quiet testament to trials she kept hidden. Her patched gray dress whispered against her worn boots, its frayed hem catching the floorboards. The brass bracelet on her wrist glinted as she moved, a relic of a past she was beginning to face. In the kitchen, the chipped teacup and wooden horse carving on the shelf stood like sentinels, symbols of a ranch reborn. The silence wasn't a cage anymore. It was a canvas painted with the quiet rhythm of her days. She set to work with a gentle resolve, baking biscuits that filled the air with golden warmth, their scent a quiet rebellion against the house's cold history. She polished the hearth, her hands steady despite the ache in her shoulders, and when she found a small notebook tucked behind a rafter, its pages filled with Clara's sketches of prairie flowers, she paused. Her gray-blue eyes softened, tracing the delicate lines, and she set it beside the teacup, as if honoring a memory that wasn't hers. Her movements were reverent, as if she believed her care could mend not just the house, but the hearts within it. Outside, the wind carried the scent of frost and sage as Elliot repaired a wagon wheel, his calloused hand steady against the splintered wood. He watched Lena through the kitchen window, her silhouette a soft glow against the morning's gray. Her quiet wasn't just resilience, it was a fire, burning beneath her flinches. He noticed the way she eased at gentle sounds, the chirp of a sparrow, the creak of the porch, but tensed at sharper ones like a dog's bark in the distance. When she hauled firewood to the porch, her arms shook under the weight, but she stacked it with care, her jaw set like she was claiming her place in the world. That evening, as the sky burned indigo and gold, a sudden shout from Sage Hollow, a drunken ranch hand in the distance, pierced the quiet. Lena froze in the yard, her basket of laundry clattering to the ground, her gray-blue eyes wide with a fear that stole Elliot's breath. She backed against the barn, her hands trembling, her bracelet glinting in the dusk. Elliot dropped his hammer and crossed the yard, his boots soft on the earth, his brown eyes steady. "Lena," he said, his voice low like a lifeline. "It's just some fool in town. You're here. You're safe." Her breath hitched, her freckles stark against her pale cheeks. She slid to the ground, her hands clutching her knees, and for the first time her voice broke. "He used to shout like that," she whispered, her words raw like a wound torn open. "My father never knew when it had turned to fists." Elliot knelt beside her, slow, his locket catching the starlight. "He ain't here," he said, his voice rough but warm. "No one's gonna hurt you, not while I'm around." He reached out, not touching, but close enough to offer a shield. You don't have to carry it alone. Lena's eyes locked on his, raw and unguarded, tears glinting but not falling. I don't know how to stop, she murmured, her voice a thread, frayed but honest. But I'm trying. Elliot's thumb brushed the locket, his heart pounding. Clara taught me you don't stop carrying the past, he said. You just learn to hold it lighter. We can learn together. She nodded, a faint curve touching her lips. Not a smile, but close enough to kindle something in him. He offered his hand and she took it, her grip trembling but firm, a bridge between two souls finding their way. As night deepened, the prairie glowed under a star-strewn sky, its light silvering the grasslands. Lena sat on the porch, Elliot's coat around her shoulders, her bracelet a faint shimmer. He joined her, his coffee mug steaming, the silence, between them warm, a language they spoke fluently. What had forged Lena's fear, and could their shared spark grow into a love that mended their broken hearts? The Montana prairie lay serene under a winter's dawn, its amber grasses cloaked in frost, sparkling like a vow etched in starlight. Sage Hollow's church bell tolled softly, its echo weaving through the wind, a gentle hymn to lives forged in the rugged heart of the frontier. Lena's quiet work had transformed Elliot's ranch, her steady hands turning a house of sorrow into a sanctuary where hope took root. Their pasts, Elliot's loss of Clara, Lena's buried scars, had once cast shadows as long as the prairie itself. But in the silence they shared, a love had bloomed, fierce yet tender, binding two broken souls into something unbreakable. As the sun rose, their story was ready to light the endless plains. Elliot stood on the porch, his brown eyes drinking in the first rays of a sun that painted the horizon in hues of pink and gold. The scar above his cheekbone softened in the gentle light, a mark of battles now left to the wind. His dark hair, streaked with gray, was bare, his felt hat resting on the rail, its brim curled like a quiet promise. His flannel shirt hung loose, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms knotted from years of toil, and the silver locket beneath his collar, Clara's initials etched deep, felt lighter now, a memory cherished but no longer a chain. A new leather cord circled his wrist, woven by Lena with a single bead, its deep blue catching the dawn, a sign of their shared path. Lena had become his home, her guarded gaze and quiet strength kindling a love he'd thought lost forever. He was ready to face the future, not alone, but with her. Lena woke to the soft rustle of frost-kissed grasses beyond her window, her gray-blue eyes opening to a dawn that bathed her room in silver and rose. She smoothed her auburn hair into a loose bun, strands framing her freckled face, each freckle a testament to trials she'd faced and overcome. She slipped into a new dress, a deep indigo cotton she'd sewn herself, its hem embroidered with tiny prairie flowers, a quiet claim to the life she'd built. Her brass bracelet glinted as she moved, no longer a weight of pain but a badge of resilience. In the kitchen, the chipped teacup, wooden horse, and Clara's notebook stood proud on the shelf, symbols of a ranch reborn. The silence was now a symphony, harmonizing with her heart's steady beat. She set to work with a gentle joy, baking bread that filled the air with golden warmth, its crust a celebration of their shared days. She tended a small garden patch behind the house, her hands coaxing life from soil once barren, planting seeds for a spring they'd face together. When she found a letter tucked inside Clara's notebook, a farewell pen to Elliot, urging him to love again, Lena's gray-blue eyes shimmered with tears. She folded it carefully, her heart steady, ready to share it when the moment felt right. She hung a new curtain in the kitchen, its blue fabric stitched with wildflower patterns, a quiet nod to the prairie that had healed her. Outside, the wind carried the scent of frost and sage as Elliot repaired the corral, his calloused hands steady against the wood. He watched Lena in the garden, her silhouette a soft glow against the winter's gray. Her quiet wasn't just healing, it was home, a fire that warmed his soul. He noticed the way she moved now, freer, her flinches nearly gone, her shoulders unbowed. When she hummed a soft tune while scattering seeds, the sound was a melody, fragile but true, and Elliot's heart swelled, knowing he'd helped her find her voice. That afternoon they rode into Sage Hollow, the wagon creaking under a load of supplies for the winter. Lena sat tall, her indigo dress bright against the frosty air, her auburn bun loosened by the wind. Elliot's brown eyes flicked to her, his leather cord catching the light, a quiet pride in his gaze. The townsfolk stared, some with whispers, others with nods, but Lena held her head high, her gray-blue eyes steady. At the general store she gathered flour and molasses, her hands sure, ignoring the shopkeeper's raised brow. A woman in a gray bonnet muttered, "That's Wade's hired girl, living like she owns the place." Lena's bracelet glinted as she paid, her silence louder than any retort. Elliot stepped close, his voice low but firm. "She's more than that," he said, his scarred cheek catching the light. "She's family." The woman faltered, and the crowd hushed, their stares softening. Lena's lips curved, not a smile but close, and Elliot's heart thumped, knowing they'd face the world together. That evening, as the sky burned indigo and gold, Lena joined Elliot on the porch, Clara's letter in her hand. Her indigo dress glowed under the starlight, her freckles bright against her cheeks. "Found this," she said, her voice soft but sure, handing him the letter. Elliot's brown eyes widened, his fingers trembling as he read Clara's words. His thumb brushed the locket, then the leather cord, his voice rough but warm. "She wanted me to live," he murmured. "With you, Lena. I'm ready." Lena's gray-blue eyes met his, unguarded, tears glinting but not falling. "I was scared to feel again," she whispered, her bracelet shining as she touched his hand. "You taught me it's safe to love." He took her hand, his grip steady, a vow etched in calloused skin. "We're stronger together," he said, his voice a promise. "Always will be." Lena leaned against his shoulder, her auburn hair brushing his arm, the silence between them a language of love. The prairie glowed under a star-strewn sky, its light silvering the grasslands. The ranch stood as a testament to the Wild West's enduring spirit, where pioneers like Lena and Elliot forged lives from dust and dreams. Their story mirrored the women and men who tamed the frontier, not with violence but with resilience, trust and love, leaving legacies in the homes they built and the hearts they mended. In Sage Hollow, their love would ripple, a quiet reminder that even broken souls could find wholeness in the vastness of the plains. If Lena and Elliot's journey touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more Wild West tales of love and courage. Drop a comment. Could you rebuild like they did in Sage Hollow? Join our Prairie family for stories that spark hope. What dreams would Lena and Elliot sow in the prairie's endless soil, and how would their love shape the frontier's future?